Evening. I'm Cindy Line with United Way of Berks County. Welcome to our live question and answer session that wraps up our series for educators on trauma-informed care. We have been pleased to offer this 4-session series on demand to help all educators navigate this challenging season of teaching and learning in a pandemic. We have been fortunate to have Dr. Colleen Lilly from Cabrini University and her colleagues present professional development sessions that educated us on understanding the impact of trauma, especially the impact of COVID-induced trauma. We learned how trauma affects you as an educator, how you can take care of yourself, and how to support your students. In the last session, we learned about a topic that was new for many of us, racial-induced trauma, and how that affects classroom dynamics and instruction. I'd like to introduce Dr. Lilly. Dr. Colleen Lilly is the director of the Barbara and John Jordan Center for Children of Trauma and Domestic Violence Education at Cabrini University. Dr. Lilly was the keynote speaker at our Ready, Set, Read Summit last fall, speaking on trauma-informed care, and the attendees wanted to learn more. We are so thankful to her for heading up this project. I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Lilly to introduce her colleagues who collaborated with her on this series. Dr. Lilly?
Thank you so much, Cindy. We're so happy to be here with all of you. Dr. Johanna Crocetto is an assistant professor of social work at Cabrini University. She teaches a wide range of courses in the areas of social work practice and field education. She serves as the coordinator of the educational field component of Cabrini's BSW program and is a faculty affiliate for the Barbara and John Jordan Center for Children of Trauma and Domestic Violence Education. She is a licensed clinical social worker, and her current clinical practice provides supervision to practicing clinicians, as well as consultation, professional trainings, and expert testimony in understanding the dynamics of child trauma, the impact trauma has on victims and their families, and methods of trauma-informed care. Dr. Crocetto's scholarly interests include trauma and its impact on families and the role of self-reflection and trauma-informed practice in social work. Dr. Zakia Gates is the assistant professor of teacher education with Cabrini University. She teaches foundation and methods courses between the teacher education department and educational policy and leadership. Her research focus includes critical race theory, critical theory in education, historical and cultural memory, culturally relevant pedagogy, and Black female empowerment. Dr. Gentili is an assistant professor in the teacher education program at Cabrini University, and she serves as the coordinator of the graduate secondary education and undergraduate special education program. She is the assistant director for the Barbara and John Jordan Center for Children of Trauma and Domestic Violence Education. Her background is alternative, juvenile, and vocational education, as well as administration, and counseling serves her well in addressing her research areas of interest, which are best practices in teaching and learning with a focus on mindset, universal design for learning, relationships, trauma-informed care education, culturally relevant and sustaining education, and social emotional learning. She is passionate about helping educators to meet the needs of all learners. So as you can see, we have wonderful expertise here in front of us tonight. And so I guess without further ado, we can get started. So at this point, I think I'm gonna just open up for some questions of my colleagues, and maybe if they want to expand on anything that they talked about within their discussions, if there's anything of interest. I think some of us talked a little bit about COVID. I don't know if all of us did, but that's obviously something that's extremely relevant today. When we talk about self-care, that's extremely important as well. I don't know about all of you, but I turn on the TV some nights and then I just want to turn it back off. So that's another piece that's really impacting our lives today. So I'm just going to open it up to any of you. Johanna, Zakia, or Amber, if you'd like to chime in with any thoughts.
I'll chime in. Speaking of COVID-19 and its impact on especially students in higher education right now, just today, one of my undergraduate students reached out to me about, may I get an extension on an assignment? I said, of course, it's not a problem, because she expressed to me that she lost her brother this summer due to COVID-19. and her brother had just come from Mali and on the continent of Africa. And there was this part of the family that he has not seen in a very, very long time, ended up getting COVID, and then he passed away suddenly, and she had to suddenly move out of the apartment because he was supporting her, and now she had to get her own place. And she just said things were just really, really hard. So I just ask us as leaders, as instructors, as teachers, like just to always accommodate. I know sometimes we hear these stringent guidelines of, well, you know, make sure they stay on task. We are doing that. We're helping them stay organized, but at the same time, we have to be extremely understanding. So I've been on my laptop all day. So I'm glad that we have this space right now. But when I got that this morning, I said I had to get off my laptop just for a little bit, because that just, it really hit home for me when she told me that.
I think, yeah, you know, and I've had a couple of experiences, and in fact, I think I may have that same student. And so when, especially when we look at K-12, right, too, and we look at the young ones, and I saw on Facebook this morning, I should have shared it. There's a little boy, African-American boy, and he filmed himself. I don't know if any of you saw it, but I see nods. So
yeah, I saw that, yeah.
He filmed himself going, and he just got off Zoom or whatever platform they were using, and he goes, these teachers are working hard, you know, and he was like, God, you know, you gotta love your teachers. Like he was just, so it was so sweet.
Keep doing it. Keep doing it.
But we just need to hear that. And you're right, Zakia, sometimes we have students too who can't verbalize how they're feeling. And so, and we might see it in their behaviors. And so being cognizant of what behaviors we're seeing is super important right now. Anyone else?
I had a thought. I've just been thinking a lot about how we talk about trauma-informed care, and that our approach should be instead of saying what's wrong with you, what's happened to you, or what are you going through, and taking a stance of assuming adversity, assuming something's going on. And I would say for the first time, at least in my lifetime, certainly as a teacher, that I can say that whatever my students are going through, on some level, I'm going through it as well.
Right.
So there's this paralleled experience that allows me to be flexible and accommodating, and at the same time, because I'm also going through it, it's harder to be flexible and accommodating because I have my own things on my shoulders. Mm-hmm. And so as a practicing and trained clinician, we talk about this a lot, but it's very rare that it's the shared experience of so similar is that shared experience. And if I'm working with a young one, I have a young one at home. And so there's all these parallels happening, and it's a lot to manage. And I would say it's forums like this, when you can speak to others that are managing the same challenges, that you can feel validated and supported. The best way I've cared for myself is by opening up to other teachers and really getting support and ideas and validation around my experience.
And that's so true. You know, I was sharing with some of you, my daughter is not doing well right now. And so, and she'll be okay. And I was talking to another mom who has, her daughter was supposed to go, I think it was Michigan State. And a week before they were supposed to go, Michigan State said, we're doing online learning. So she's like, you know, I have my daughter at home, and you have your daughter in an apartment, you know, going to her first year of college. My daughter's at home doing first year of college. She goes, and none of it's good. Like, you know, none of us are happy with what we have. Like, and so it's just so hard. All of it, you know, like we envy, like, well, at least you don't have this, or at least she's like, but then that's not good either. Like it just kind of, and she said, it all sucks. Like, it's just not good. Yeah. And so it's so tough. And, you know, I especially think about you folks home with the little ones. You know, I'm fortunate enough to have my children who are now young adults, but which of course has its own sets of challenges, but those of you with the little ones, I feel for our teachers and our educators that are, in fact, to your point, Johanna, they're doing what they're doing in front of their classroom, and then they have to come home, or they are home, and they are trying to manage these parallel universes, or parallel, what was it? Shared experiences. Yeah. And so it's also tough.
Yeah. I just encourage educators, you know, to take care of yourself, like we've been emphasizing, right? But then also know that the little things that you do will make a difference. to don't feel like you have to solve every problem, but just being there and being, like Dr. Gates said, being, open and able to be flexible and trying to accommodate and understand. But I just think it's so empowering to know that the stable relationship, that caring relationship makes such a profound difference. So I think that that's something that I often lean to. I'm like, okay, well, at least I can do that, right? And so I've had time, like just a couple students who weren't coming to my classes, and so I reached out to them separately. And one in particular, I was proud of her because she responded, not just to say, yeah, I'll be there next time, but she was like, because I said, would you like to meet? Is there something that you need? And she said, yeah, I would like to meet. And so we set up a meeting, and she came and she said, Dr. Gentile, I am just really suffering. I suffer from depression. Mm-hmm. And I'm just really having a hard time right now. And I just want you to know, it's not that I don't care. I just really am having a hard time getting out of bed. And so then we talked through some of the things that, we have on campus that could support her, and, how I would be understanding. But then, I did my little spiel about how, you have so much to contribute to the group. I miss you when you're not there. I understand. But if you can think about, if I said nothing else, think of me saying, oh, I wish she's here, And, and then we talked about, I made sure she got an appointment and all of this, and she was in a good place, and she would say, thank you. And ever since I did that, she has come to class. Yeah. And so now I'm trying to do just the little thing of, after class, enjoyed you today, glad you made it. Just try those little things can make a big difference. So don't feel like, I don't want educators to feel like they have to solve every problem and be the world, but just those little reach outs, will help. Even if maybe I benefit because I got to see her there. I was like, oh, yay, but even if she hadn't come, there was still, she knew that somebody cared and reached out. Right. So even if you don't see the benefits of it, that you are planting seeds and you are, making a difference. So
that's an excellent point too, Amber. And so to that point, like, what are some other ways, what are some other tips that we can give teachers, educators, anyone working with young children? And let me rephrase that, K-12, right? Or pre-K-12. What are some things that they can do to support the children? To support the parents, right? So what are some things that we can do to help them?
I think communicate.
Yeah, I was going to point to that.
Constant reminders that I'm here. What can I do? How can I help? And to remind them that we all are in this together. Yeah. That's something I'm constantly sharing too. Like, and I tell my son's teachers too, like, listen, I know that, I know you're struggling, I know you're doing everything you can. Thank you so much, but know that, cause she's always like, what can I do to help? And it's just like, it works both ways, so just those reminders, I think, is a big one. And then being willing to follow through if they come through with something.
Yeah. That's a good point.
It has to be genuine, Yeah.
Yeah, I agree to what Dr. Gentile said, but also at the same time, and I know I don't want to use this word in this space, but I think I have to, but going back to self-care, but also establishing some boundaries. I mean, it's fine. We can communicate with our families, like a daily check-in, but we have to look in after ourselves too. So it's just about, and I hate that word boundary, but there has to be some type of boundary because we need our self-care, too, along with our teachers.
I appreciate the word boundary. Actually, I talked about boundaries for a big portion of my talk for this lecture series on self-care, because our boundaries come from our values, and they can change and shift. Like right now, my values are the same, but how they come out to play in my work is different because of COVID, right? So I may not answer emails before after 7, but now because of COVID, I've stretched it out because my values have changed, but haven't changed, but how I implement them is different, right? But boundaries is how I stay true to myself, because I know human beings work best with predictability, accountability, organization, right? And so that's our boundaries. I also feel like another thing that we can do in terms of caring for ourselves and caring for the kids that we teach and the families is just as Dr. Gentili had mentioned, the student went to her and felt open and safe to talk about what they were going through and receive support. Teachers seeking out who is that amongst their peers and higher up within the organization, whether it's the school, the specific team they work on, the school, or higher administration, having that person who has a different level of power and insight, but can also lend you, just like what you did for your student, Amber, what can the school personnel do for you? So we have that open exchange of resources. It's not just all of us giving out. What are we also able to receive, and are we willing to do that for each other?
Yeah, and it's so important, because otherwise, how are we going to keep giving out if we're not taking care of ourselves?
And to that point, we're teaching these life skills too to these students, regardless of the age, the grade. We're teaching them how to get that support when we may not be there to give it, right? And so where can you go to get that support? And who can support you in this case? I think is super important. So what about in terms of when we think about, where we're heading into the winter months, right? And physical activity and all of this, and how this could affect children mentally, right? And so they may not be able to be outside as much if they're not going to school. So what are some things that teachers can do, maybe if they're on Zoom, or parents again can do at home, to keep them engaged, to keep them physically active? What are some ways that we can support that, and that hopefully will support that mental health piece too?
I think especially the time that we're in now, I have a 6-year-old niece and she's doing virtual. So luckily my sister has my mother's support. So my mother, who's retired, has to go to my sister's house. And it's like 7 o'clock in the morning just to make sure she's, on task with her schoolwork, but just taking those mental breaks. So she has her walk away from the computer every once in a while. And the teacher is very understanding of that. My niece is very hyper. I know when she comes over here, so she's very hyper. So she needs those breaks just to kind of, walk around, walk in the hallway, go downstairs in the basement, play with her cats for a little while, and then come back upstairs, and get right back into the classroom. But her gym teacher, because she still has gym, I said, well, how are you doing gym? Explain that to me as a 6-year-old, how's that working? And the gym teacher is there and he has them, doing jumping jacks, and they're on the floor. So there's still that physical activity that they get in there. And I think my mother every now and then tries to do it, but she's getting older, so she can't do as much anymore. But
I'm impressed.
Yeah, she tries. She does try. So, but I think just walking away and letting those teachers know, like, hey, there needs to be some type of plan where these children, especially in kindergarten and first grade, they just can't sit all day in front of a computer. They need these, these breaks and intervals every now and then to take a breather, a brain break, just from looking at the computer all day.
That's good. A brain break.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I actually had the opportunity to speak with one of our partners today who is doing out of school care. And so they have children in their center who are doing their remote learning while they're in the center. So I feel my main area of expertise is early childhood. And so I feel for these children who are so far out of their routine, and their routine keeps changing what it looks like. And she was telling me today about a little kindergarten boy who just in the middle of everything snapped his Chromebook shut, put it in his backpack, took it over, hung it up on the hook, and then slid down and sat on the floor and started crying and said, I just can't do this anymore. Aww. This is kindergarten. And so, I mean, I think it's very important for all of us to look at how we can support the children, take care of those cues. And my question would be to all of you who are dealing with children who are affected by trauma and have that expertise. So I know you can't predict the future, but so this is this little kindergartner's day today. And of course, fortunately, he was in a place that was nurturing and they were attentive to him and helped him to calm himself and cope. But I mean, what kind of effects do you see this having on children as we move forward, especially now you were, like Dr. Lally was talking about being in the winter months and they might not be able to get out. What kind of signs should educators be looking for that would be concerning?
My spiel is always that you have to get to know your students. So if you know your students, red flags are usually if you see a change. They used to be this and now they're showing signs of this. Any drastic change are red flags. If it's somebody who used to be energetic and would talk a lot and now all of a sudden isn't really talking or reaching out, isn't involved, that can be a red flag. Or those kind of behaviors that aren't the norm for that child is really where you might want to start paying attention and asking some questions.
I would add to that to say when children are unable to recall a lot of information, just basic, simple information. If I use the example of my niece and I asked her, well, how are you doing music and what are you doing music class? This is what I asked her. And she said, music. And I'm thinking, oh, well, I know that, but what exactly? But she says, I don't know. And she's 6. So they're able to say, we played this, we did this, we looked at this, but at this time, she can't recall too much information. So I would say that's like a first sign as well. Yeah.
I would also say too, I'm thinking of for middle school age children and potentially high school children and students as well. I think what Amber said is really true, a shift or a change. And especially, I think this is where support and education for caregivers in the home are going to be really helpful. As teachers, maybe they are showing up for class, they're showing up for their Zoom lesson. We don't know that they haven't left their room in 3 days and it's kind of dark and maybe that's typical, but if it's new, right? So how does the school district support the caregivers to pick up on changes in behaviors? I believe elementary sometimes, the younger the child is, the less ability they have to lie or hide or play hypothetical, right? Just because of their developmental abilities. As they get older, they get savvy on change of being able to present themselves in certain ways if it helps them get through the day. And so we want to be mindful of how can we support the caregivers. But I also think that this is an opportunity for teachers and for caregivers to be even more intentional of giving students permission to identify, name what they're feeling, and ask for help. So for the first time ever, we're really having to really be so intentional and mindful and constant in that messaging. And I often do it, no matter how old the student is, I often model it for myself. I'll start the lesson by saying, I had a really hard time last night. As an example, of course, I'm teaching in higher ed, but I have to say the debate was one night, the political debate was one night. Next morning, I'm running a class and I started my class saying, I didn't really sleep that much last night. I'm feeling a little off today. If I get tongue-tied, that's why. And I don't share with them what I'm thinking because that's my business, but I let them know how I'm feeling. And I bring that dialogue into the classroom, not to be their therapist, but to model for them that this can be a space that if you're feeling something, you've permission to say it, you've permission to ask for help. And if caregivers offer that narrative at home as well, whatever we're seeing and worried about, they'll have the language to be able to help so we can help them.
I love that, Johanna. And I actually was going to say that, the caregivers could be a real support system, in engaging the caregiver with that relationship building as well. Amber and I were engaged over the summer with another colleague at another institution in surveying some teachers and administrators in neighboring districts about the COVID-19 and about the shutdown in the spring. And a lot of the teachers, some of the benefits they conveyed were the fact that they were able to get to know the caregivers better. And so they found that to be beneficial. And so, the caregivers, I think, and Zakia and I are teaching the same course right now, which is coming in great at this time because we could talk about how you can have that partnership with the caregivers. And then also, I love the part, Johanna, what you said too also, and I think Amber and Zakia both touched on it, is that feelings piece. Now's the time to teach students self-advocacy skills. I have 2 nephews, one's in 7th grade and one's in 5th grade. And unfortunately, the 7th grader is now, it's considered, he's in the middle school now. So for the first time, he has lots of different teachers. And so not only does he have lots of different teachers, he now has lots of different teachers on Zoom. And so trying to keep up with that and keep up with the workload. And so I was over and I talked to him. I'm like, listen, you kind of have to be, you have to and I said the term, you have to self-advocate for yourself. And that means, like, if you don't know, you have to ask. You know, mom she shouldn't have to email the teacher all the time. It's your turn now to go to the teacher's office hours and ask those questions. So teaching those life skills, as hard as it is right now that you just want them to be little forever, coming up with those life skills that they can learn from this.
Yeah, that's important. That's important too. And like, that's what I was trying to teach the one student who then I did meet with. You know, I said, you know, I understood that she was struggling, and, you know, I was trying to be supportive that way. But at the same time, I was trying to draw from her, how could we handle this if you have that day where you can't get out, you know, and what can we do, and how can, you know, because we still have these expectations. We still have things that, you know, you're here to get educated. So what can we do? And those kind of things, I was trying to teach her how to advocate in a way that was appropriate as well. So that's a great point.
So in terms of, you know, when we're thinking about, so some of us are in that sandwich generation too, right? So not only are we taking care of little ones, but we might also be taking care of our elderly parents or grandparents. So what are some recommendations too, in terms of, I'm thinking like classroom, like what do we talk to students about? Because they're now, you know, they're hearing the news, they're seeing what's happening, they're hearing maybe about the older population and how the vulnerable populations may be affected by this. How do we talk with children about that? How do we do that in a virtual world and or in a classroom setting?
I think that's where social emotional learning comes in, you know, and I think that especially in the pre-K through 12 world, you know, high school looks differently, obviously, but doing those morning meetings, if you will, I like to call them more responsive meetings because they don't have to be in the morning, but coming together as a group and problem solving together and drawing from, you know, each individual within that group, I think is helpful, you know, and giving them a voice. And then, you know, modeling some of those behaviors, I think that helps a lot. But just giving everybody a chance to be seen and heard, I think would go a long way. But those, you know, responsive circles, I think, are just a great way to address some of these things that we're experiencing right now. And when I did my presentation, one of the things that when I was doing research, it really just says to give those opportunities for the students to express themselves, you know, and help them get to have the language to do that. But obviously then you have to be very deliberate about creating those safe spaces and that relationship, and hold those high standards for supporting one another, you know, so nobody's fearful of negative comments or, you know, what kind of feedback they'll get. But I think that that's a really important thing, especially during these times, to take the time to do that. You know, check in with everybody, you know, even if it's just a short little, you know, somebody gives an adjective of how they're feeling or whatever it may be, but to check in with each and every person.
And I just want to add to that as well, because doing the morning meetings, it also connects to building this whole culture of learning with your students as well, by also, you know, as Amber has just said, giving each student a voice, but the teacher has to keep in mind to be the facilitator and not the one to say, here's the question. Even if the question does change, or if the teacher starts out with a question, as Amber, just allow them just to speak. You know, if it's one word, nothing should be, you know, quantifiable. Say, okay, you have 3 minutes to speak or 2 minutes to speak. Just allow each child to speak. And if one child takes for 10 minutes, then okay, maybe that's going to make the next child to feel, okay, then I can really get this out there about what's bothering me, even though you took a long time, such and such, but okay, I can speak my piece now too.
And that's skill building. That's a skill,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
You know, and that's, I saw a phrase in an article I read today that says like about humanizing education. And I'm like, that's it. That's what I'm talking about. So what can we do to humanize the whole process? And it's those kind of things that are so important.
And I think there's so many venues to do it. It could be, you know, if like both my colleagues said, a vocal discussion is great because it builds relationship and empathy, which is so wonderful. But if we do it through, I've done with much older students, quick draws. How are you feeling today? What's your greatest success of the week? What's your biggest challenge of the week? And you can't write a word, you have to draw a picture and express it that way, or personal letters to yourself, or I've seen, there's lots of therapeutic interventions for young children where they write a letter to somebody, and if they don't have the writing skills yet, it can include art. So there's so many different ways that we can offer space in the classroom for children to identify and express how they're feeling. And then if we can build in the relationship building around that, it's even better. And I think it's more important than ever to be as creative as we can, but doing it. And those different venues, I think, can work virtually on something like Zoom, small breakout groups where they first write, or they have a picture, they show it to their partner, and then you get into, we can get creative. Technology it's limiting, but it can also offer some exciting opportunities, I think.
Yeah, and I agree with everything. And, one of the things that I love using children's literature. And so using children's literature as a way to communicate, as a way for them to say how they're feeling, to verbalize what's going on, to support them through this time. And there are books already out there regarding COVID too. So if that's a topic of that conversation, or if there's other traumas that they may be enduring, because unfortunately other traumas aren't stopping. This is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, October 1, and the research is showing that it's more of an epidemic more than ever, and so that there's that piece or that layer that's there as well. So I wanted to ask Zakia, at the beginning, we were talking a little bit about racial trauma. Can you just, summarize quickly, quickly, it's like an understatement, right? Can you talk a little bit about racial trauma and some of what you discussed in your session, and maybe, how that can connect to what's happening, what we see is going on culturally today, but also COVID connected maybe as well?
Sure. So just to kind of reiterate some points from my presentation, I always felt as though that if teachers really want to learn a lot about race-induced trauma, they have to first address the most uncomfortable thing in the world, which is to talk about race. And if I were to include this quote that I had by Jay-Z in my presentation, I just want to repeat it quickly, and I want to say quickly, but he did say that identity is a prison you can never escape, but the way to redeem your past is not to run from it, but try to understand it and use it as a foundation to grow. So when I have said this quote before, the first thing that some people have said is, well, why is he talking about prison? Okay, you missed the whole point of that quote right there. So I'm like, he's not talking about prison. If I go back to my middle school years and teaching English, he's bringing like this connection through a metaphor, okay? So teachers really have to get into their identity and who they are. So this is why in my presentation, when I talked about race-induced trauma, you have to address race, make sure that you know it's a social construct that is made up by society. So we don't know it exists unless society says it is there. So the analogy I always like to use to explain this to students is, think about SpongeBob. I'm not a big fan of SpongeBob, so no offense, but my daughter is in love with SpongeBob and she watches it all the time at 19 years old. So there was an episode of SpongeBob where it was him and Squidward, and SpongeBob started to say how this rumor got started. So SpongeBob said, I knew this guy, who knew this guy, who knew this guy, who knew this guy, who knew this guy, and this went on for about 2 minutes. So I went upstairs to the bathroom, came down, SpongeBob was still saying this. So it went on for like minutes. So why do I bring that up? This is how people say, this is how you know who you are, because someone told you, someone told you, someone told you, someone told you that you were white, you were Black, you were Asian, you were this, you were that. So that's how I help to explain this social construct of race, because you don't know who you are until someone tells you. So teachers have to understand that. So you're going to teach through the lens of where you grew up, which is called your social location or your social positionality. So where you are develops your whole worldview as to how you see the environment, how you see society, and how you see people. So when I talk about race-induced trauma, if teachers were to actually get into this, they have to learn how to decolonize the curricula. The curricula It is. They call it a colonized curriculum. So that means it's only done to make children adapt to a dominant white culture. This is what it is, right? So I use a couple of examples in my presentation, but there was another one that I did not put there, which I have pretty much told my students about to respond to. And this was about Huckleberry Finn. And we remember that book, and I think it has been banned and so forth. And I warned my students that there is some heavy duty language in there if you look it up on Wikipedia, right? And I asked them, how would you be able to teach this lesson of Huckleberry Finn if it was still in the curricula? We're just, imagine if we're years back now, so I kind of put them in that aspect. But how would you teach this by either enhancing the induced trauma or how you're going to decrease the trauma? How would you do that? So their answers were very, very interesting. Some people said, I have no idea how I would do this. So I said, well, here you go. Do you understand anything about race? No, I do not. I said, okay. What are your perceptions about other people of other races? So we play a positive stereotype game, okay? And when I say positive stereotype game, some of my students are like, it's a stereotype, so how can it be positive? I said, you have positive ones, you have negative stereotypes. So we're gonna do a positive stereotype game. So I list all of the racial backgrounds on the whiteboard when I was doing this face-to-face. And I said, in your groups, I want you to think about 1 to 2 positive stereotypes about each and every social construct that you see here. So I put white first, everyone else is in between, and then I always put black last, and I'll tell you why in a minute. So as I saw the responses, and they were giving me these responses, I noticed that white and Asian, Latinx, Native American, they were all given these positive stereotypes of high critical thinking, working really hard, really in that upper hierarchy in the social system, right? So when it came to African American and Black, it was more so athletic. Then it was like a lot of hesitation. They were trying to think of other things. So why did I do that? I did that based on 2 things. One, I wanted to see a lot about your social identity, how you relate to people, your perceptions of people as teachers, as future teachers. And I was also timing them. So I asked the question of, how come when it came to all of the other social constructs, everyone responded within 2 seconds? So why is it when it came to African American and Black, everyone was kind of hesitant? Or some people didn't think of anything, or you think of athletic. So they're looking at me and they're like, okay, I really don't want to say anything, which I understood. And I said, are you afraid I'm gonna call you a racist? And it was silence in the room. I said, I'm not gonna call you that because we're here to learn, right? So let's talk about this. And we started to look into a lot of historical context of Black and brown students in schools and why teachers may feel the way they feel. So if there is much hesitation when it comes to the category of African American and Black, and you hesitate, you take a long time to answer to give me something positive, stereotypical, but it's positive, then you're gonna be a teacher if you identify as white and you're in a school setting. How are you going to perceive those Black students if you're already hesitant about who they are and what they're able to do? So I like to play like little mind games with them. Don't tell them I said that, but that's what I do with them. So I play like little mind games, but they start to see it, from that aspect. But just to continue just a little bit more into race-induced trauma, if teachers learn how to decolonize the curricula by studying it and doing research outside of the curricula, I understand we have mandates we have to follow. I get that. But if we want to resolve what I like to call this social justice in the eye of the current storm, with the social protests that are going on, how are you able to teach to society while at the same time not trying to re-traumatize the students? So you have to look at your curricula. I used To Kill a Mockingbird. Some teachers either re-traumatize or you can reduce. So we understand that To Kill a Mockingbird is told through a white girl's perspective. So the question is, if it's being told by her perspective, how are Black and brown students able to relate to that, number one? But number two, if you're trying to re-traumatize, Black students want to see themselves where they're able to win for once, if people follow where I'm going with this. So in To Kill a Mockingbird, the Black experience is not an achievable goal to winning, like going to the finish line. Is always, oh, here we are in the same predicament. Here we go again. I don't want to, and this is why we have what we have in the classroom, right? If it's slave movies that teachers want to show, that's okay, but how are you going to decolonize that to make sure you're not re-traumatizing your Black and your brown students who are also included in that history? Here we go again. Oh my God, we just can't win. We just can't win. And now you want me to do an essay on this. Okay, right? So we don't want that to happen. We don't want to be traumatized, because if I'm thinking about education of the heart, teachers need to think of themselves as surgeons, as doctors. So you have to provide this post-operative care that's going to help them in the long run. We don't want to keep re-traumatizing these kids all the way up to adulthood, where we give them this whole angle of society of, I'm Black, I'm brown, and I just can't win. So why should I even believe the next person that tells me along that I'm able to do this? Or you just work hard and you'll just be successful. Well, that's not what I was shown in school. Well, that's not what I was shown in the K through 12 context. That's not what I was shown. So why should I believe anyone else or some leader? It could be Barack Obama. Why should I believe him when he's going to tell me I can do anything? When that's not what the school has actually shown me what to do. So I know there's one more thing I wanted to add there as well, but other things with race-induced trauma, what can also happen is it's not just ingrained in the curricula, but you can also find it in the school structure. Sometimes it's how a school is shaped, how it's structured, whether or not there's enough light that's actually coming in. And being a middle school teacher myself years ago, I saw this in urban schools, where some of the urban schools, as soon as you go in, you had to be searched when we were face-to-face. Some urban schools I was teaching in, and I could look up and just imagine correctional officers just walking across, the hallways this way. That was the first thing that would come to my mind when it came to that. But there was a research article that I did read by Dr. Muhammad Khalifa and others, and it was about culturally responsive school leadership. And one of the things they talked about is how teachers can either intentionally or unintentionally reproduce oppressive content within the school structure. So some teachers may do it on purpose, hopefully not, but some teachers just do it unintentionally, meaning that they haven't done their further research into that particular standard in their curricula, into that particular, the types of materials that are being used to actually look at certain images, that they should use in their classroom. So if we want to make our classrooms this culturally responsive, energetic type of, context, we also have to watch what we're putting on the walls all at the same time. So just because someone is a character in a story and the artist colors them brown, doesn't mean that's what their ethnicity or their race is. It just could be, and I've seen this, and I remember playing my Barbie dolls. I saw the same thing growing up, but just because I have a white Barbie doll, here's a brown one. Someone just took the brown paint and put it on the white doll. So it's the same thing when we see this in images in the classroom. So are these images authentic? Are these really Black and brown children? Or are we taking another image and just the artist is just adding color to it? But where's the the biological reality of that particular group of people? So all children are visual. This is what they see. And I warn my students that as soon as they come to your classroom, this is what they do. They look all around. They don't even see you. They want to see if they are there in the classroom. So they have to see themselves on the walls. They have to see themselves in the content. Even though they may not see themselves as winning, how can you make them win in this experience? What other piece can you show them outside of this? So we don't want to re-traumatize. We have to make sure we become those surgeons, and for the long run, this is the post-operative care for them.
I love that.
Thank you.
You should remember that for your third year portfolio and your 10-year portfolio. That is
Thank you.
Good. I love that. That's
Thank you.
awesome. And to your point too, like even children's literature, looking at children's literature, I introduced in that class the other day, I brought in books. We were talking about different types of families. So I brought in books that were all different types of families. I brought in, where it was, two moms. I had another one, it was two dads. I had an adoptive family. I had a Black and brown and Caucasian. I think it was a Black and brown father, the Black father, and then it was a white mother. So I brought these in, and one of my students said, "I didn't even know these books existed," and I was like. Yeah. But it's really important, and I was these are pre-service teachers, right? So trying to tell them that they need to be seen.
Yeah.
That's excellent. Thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Johanna, you talked about self-care. And so, you know, we hear self-care, right? And we have to take care of ourselves.
Sure.
And we talked a little bit about this, but what can they do, right? And so we talked about those, the barriers but what can they do to really be sure they're taking care of themselves?
I have two visceral reactions to that. And they both stem around my dislike for the word self and self-care. I really believe care is the responsibility of you, but then it has to be relational. It has to be community, has to be organizational, and it certainly should be systemic. I don't think that anyone really feels cared for if they're just going for a run and taking a bubble bath. I think it's a very expensive Band-Aid, time-consuming Band-Aid, and it's not really gonna heal. I mean, care really means heal and protection, I feel like. And so when I think about the term self-care, I think about how it needs to be relational. So I'm a social worker at heart. So one of our core values in social work is the importance of human relationships. So we believe in our everyday practice, in our every element of service, that growth and change only occurs through relationship with others. And so when you say build relationships with your students, it's not just healing for your students, it's healing for you too, right? So building relationships, and that requires us to be open to relationships. And sometimes that can be really hard when we're feeling down, overwhelmed, frustrated. I know myself, the worse I am feeling, the less I am to engage in great relationships, right? But am I open to letting others know what my self-care plan is? Do others know that if I haven't slept a full 8 hours, I'm a bear in the morning? And do I allow them to know that so they can hold me accountable and care for me in my self-care plan, right? I think a connection to the greater community outside of our work can be really helpful. In my presentation, I put a video. I volunteered as a choreographer for an elementary school bucket drums program. It was such a fun experience, and it was overwhelming, but it was something that I typically wouldn't do in a way I wouldn't do it. And it was so uplifting. And right now I take the time every Tuesday, I volunteer for the local food bank and deliver food to community members. And it's humbling and exciting work. And I mean, I'm a social worker. These are the things I do, but I'm doing it for a greater purpose. And that can fill my pitcher of water, right? But I also really think that I think there's organizational responsibility for the care of their employees. And I think that has to do with leadership. And I think it doesn't have to just be the named leaders in the organization. If I take that stance, then I have to hold myself accountable and be a leader I have a department at Cabrini. It's just me and another person, but I'm not waiting for my boss to check in with me. Do I reach out and check in with her, right? Do I let her know my self-care plan? Am I open to hearing hers? And building those relationships and taking it upon myself to turn to the right of me and turn to the left of me and say, how can I serve? How can I help? And then I feel helped. Right? It's been proven over and over that when we can serve someone else, we feel full. And those things can be really hard to do when we're not doing well, especially in these particular circumstances with so much happening. And that's where I think organizational leadership where they're promoting permission to care for oneself, time to build relationships, time to care for themselves, permitting teachers to have time to tap in, tap out, cover, have a day, have a moment, own their curriculum. We trust you to teach what you need to teach in the way that you know best for you, right? Imagine having a leader that says that, feeling a sense of safety in our jobs so we can feel like a risk doesn't feel like a risk anymore, right? And I feel like that's a level of care too. And I sometimes get nervous when I talk about those things. I don't mean to say that organizations aren't doing a good job. I actually know that some are, because I've worked in those places. And then I've worked in the places that haven't. And so I felt the difference, right? And I'm able to care for myself better and build relationships better when there's this organizational norm and precedent for being okay, or if you're not okay, for asking for help, right? I feel it at Cabrini. So when I hear the word self-care, I really think about the different ways that we can care for ourselves, but always through relationships with others.
I love that. I love that. And so just like I told Zakia to put that in her third year review, you need to put that in yours too. You know, but really that's amazing. that, you know, and I knew I was kind of throwing you like when I said self-care, but that's exactly right. Like it has to be, and it's on us to take care of others. And then in turn, it comes back to us as well too. And so I'm going to move to Amber, and Amber talked a lot about trauma and the pandemic. And so we already kind of hit on those things, and I know, Amber, you talked a lot about that, but tell us a little bit more. What more do you want to add to maybe what we've already said in regards to trauma and the pandemic?
Well, Johanna made me think of something when she was talking about, you know, in relationship. And I think another thing for us to remember and to explicitly teach children is that sometimes discomfort is an opportunity for growth. And I think as it's human nature, you know, there's research out there that shows we tend to go to those that are like us, and that's our preference, but that's not how we grow. And so I think it's helpful to teach children about how there's beauty in different, and there's beauty in other. And then so that just expands their comfort level with one another. And I think that, you know, one of the things that's beautiful about diversity is there's so many different opportunities to broaden that lens that, you know, Dr. Gates said that we have, right? We all have this lens that we're seeing the world through. And anything that we can do to explicitly teach or to encourage or to demonstrate or model the widening of that lens is such a gift, right? And so I feel like during these times that we're in right now, we're all in kind of like this disequilibrium, if you will, because of everything that's going on. And to your point, Colleen, about you turn on the news and you're like, I want to turn it off because so many things are upsetting right now. But to use those circles, to give your students a time to share and express, they can actually start to see that, you know, that there are similarities and differences, right? And that, you know, that we can grow through those relationships. And so I just think that we're, the phrase, the iceberg is melting. I think we're on this impetus, and I think that our next moves are going to be very telling, there's great opportunity right now to move forward. And I just hope that as educators that, you know, we're taking care of ourselves, we're helping other people, right? And that came out in our research too, Dr. Lilly, is that a lot of teachers were saying that some of the thing that they were feeling is that, yes, I have all this burden on myself right now, I'm overwhelmed, that all came out. But then they said they were also concerned for their colleagues. And, you know, but also that they've learned that through this mutual experience that they've reaching out to each other and supporting one another. And so if children can recognize that and learn how to use it in an effective way, I think that that's a big gift. But, you know, just helping students or children to understand, if you're a little bit uncomfortable, that's okay. And that's a place where we can build from and grow. And so, you know, and then like to your point about the books, I mean, that just speaks volumes to me about our educational system, that we don't know there's books out there. I mean, that's a problem, that those are the books that are so all those things, just being open to feedback, open to other people's perspectives, other people's realities are just going to make you a better person. And so if we can teach that to our children, give them a place to explore these things and a place to truly get to know each other and to learn about other cultures and what's out there, I think that's going to keep us healthy. You know, I think that's really important. And when you do see some of your students who might be falling off the radar, doing those little personal reach outs and giving, you know, asking how they're feeling and giving those opportunities for that is I mean, it's just so valuable, you know. And, you know, teachers are really struggling right now, and it's okay for students to know that, you know. And like, you know, you talked about the little boys giving his video, like, they're doing so good, keep doing it. You know, it's good for them to see that, hey, you know, look, you know, adults have their realities too, and they have things that they have to work through, and we're here to do it, and we're here to help, and let the students know the energy that you draw from them, you know, that you need them to be there. Like, you are making my day, I was so upset, but now I'm with you. And, you know, those things, I think I mean, it sounds so easy, but, you know, it's so much research to back up that those things truly do make a difference. And that has to be for all the children, not just some of the children. You know, and to Dr. Lilly's point, that sometimes the ones who are the most challenging, you know, we have to remember, and I think Dr. Crocetto pointed this out too, that sometimes those things that are manifesting in behaviors are actually other needs coming out. And so instead of, seeing that as a flaw or something that's like, oh, I'm going to stay away from them, those are the ones who really need you to be consistent and to reach out and to be caring and to continue to be that person for them. I don't know if I answered your question or not.
You did. I think all of it. I mean, it's, I love the idea of, I had a graduate class right before this evening. And so what what I do is I ask, what are your successes this week and what are your struggles? They're all teachers, and to your point, just hearing what others are going through is really wonderful. And they're making those relationship building. We're building up that culture within that classroom. It's a grad class, but still, that's how, sharing of that information. And, you're always, sometimes you're uncomfortable, like asking, are they going to share? And then they do. And it's like, okay, well, that was 20 minutes. That's wonderful. So let's go on to and little kids, they tend to want to share a lot too, but sometimes they may not. And so those ideas of how to get them to share is really important as well. Anyone want to
accept them where they are, accept them where they are, that, if they're not in a place where they're ready to do that right now, but okay, well, I'm still here. So maybe tomorrow, whatever it may be, but like, just letting them know that, you're going to be that consistent person who they know what to expect from you. And it's going to be acceptance and it's going to be encouragement.
Colleen, if I could say one thing on that, going back to what Dr. Gentili said about building those relationships, and if I were to tie in the race-induced trauma and how we can also re-traumatize, and starting with the teacher and their social identity, it's suggested that teachers should write about their personal experiences to explain how it influenced their lives. And I think in order to open up that phase of discussions of like social issues, I think teachers should write and reflect and reveal their own encounters with racism, their own encounters with sexism and ableism and things of that nature, since we're talking in terms of diversity. Or if they haven't had an encounter with that, maybe express your encounter of actually witnessing any of those isms over time. Because I think that revealing those encounters of race, class, and gender and culture, it just provides another avenue of these brave and safe spaces for students to actually participate in these reflections and these discussions that we're having. So I think that's also important too.
I think it's such a good point. From a clinical stance, we always say we should never ask a client to do something we're not willing to do ourselves. And I always think of that with my students as well. If I'm asking them to self-reflect and share, I should not only be willing to do it, but have that be a regular practice and start modeling it before they even get going with it. So whenever I'm planning an activity or thinking about diving deeper, or even an assignment, thinking, have I done this work? Right? And if I have, how do I be vulnerable, be brave, share it with them, and then they're more likely to engage in it as well. Yeah, I love that.
It's interesting because the graduate class I was just referring to, it's a writing course. So it's the teaching, it's like the teaching of writing. And so they're writing and I'm writing too, because for the same reason, I'm not going to have them write if I'm not going to have them do it and share if I'm not doing it and sharing. So that was awesome. Anyone have anything else?
Dr. Lely, hello, it's Tammy White from United Way. How are you?
Good, how are you?
I am good. I am sorry that I had to pop in late, but I I've been on for about a half hour. And first of all, I have learned so much in this half hour, and I am incredibly grateful to you and your colleagues for sharing your knowledge, your wisdom, your experiences with us, and allowing us to record all of the sessions, because it is a gift that is going to keep giving over and over again. And I believe wholeheartedly that what you have shared, for those who take the time to listen to your sessions, are going to have some real learning and some real impact as a result of it. So thank you so very much.
Well, thank you. I can't tell you enough how proud I am to work with these fabulous women. And I can say women because They're all women here today.
Yes, they are.
But, I'm very lucky. We have some great colleagues at Cabrini, and I just could not be happier to work with them. I wish I could hug them and see them in person, but they are some phenomenal experts in this area.
We all learn from each other, which is just fabulous. Like, I enjoy this so much.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I can tell you enjoy it, which is really great. So.
Well, thank you so much. We can't thank you enough for thinking of us and keeping us in mind, and please do so in the future. We're always happy to get the word out. We just want to educate others, and that's our love. So we really enjoy it.
Well, thank you all for your passion. It really shines through, and keep doing the great work that you're doing. It's needed now more than ever.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, so Dr. Lilly, if people who are watching this afterwards would have questions, how can they get in touch with you and your colleagues to ask their questions?
Excellent. So I'll give you my email, and it is also at the end of the PowerPoint that I provided. So if they need to look there, they can find it there as well. But my email is cl724@Cabrini, CABRINI.edu. And so they can certainly email me. That's the best way these days to definitely reach me. And I would be happy to respond. And I'm sure my colleagues can share their information as well.
Thank you. Well, thank you. I echo Tammy's words. Thank you so much. The sessions have just been wonderful, and we are so pleased that we can keep them on the ReadySetReadBerks.org website so that educators and anybody who's working with children, even families, could benefit from watching this, and that they will be there to be able to be accessed. And so this question and answer follow-up is just a wonderful way to wrap up the series. And I thank you ladies so much for your time and energy that you put into this. It has been very a wonderful series. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Definitely our pleasure. All right, well, this concludes our question and answer session for our series for educators on trauma-informed care. We hope you have found this informative and thought-provoking, and that it will definitely impact your practice and how you approach yourself, your family, your colleagues, your students, and everyone around you. And we hope that you will come back and watch it over again. So thank you, everybody, and have a good evening.
Thank you.